Chair. I just want to bring you back, Mr Abid, to questions around funding for SBS, how it was treated in the last budget, foreshadowed legislation to allow SBS to effectively shift its the balance of advertising on your stations. Can you maybe just quickly provide us with an update as to your understanding of how the legislative process is going to run from here, when that bill needs to be through to provide certainty for the station?
So that is correct, that the proposed legislation is to allow SBS to have some flexibility around the number of minutes of advertising throughout the day, with a maximum cap per hour of 10 minutes. 10 minutes as a maximum cap. It's a question, I guess, for the department, I think, in terms of the next steps for the legislative process. But my understanding of it is that a proposal will obviously go before the Senate sometime in the next couple of months for consideration, and then that would be considered after that, obviously, in terms of the impact that it would have on SBS.
Does it got to be through the next through before the next budget, the 2015-16?
I would certainly hope so, but I'm not aware of that a date's been set by the Minister's office or the department.
We've got the Manager of Government Business in the Senate sitting here with us. Are you able to wear that hat for us for a moment, Senator Fifield? What's the government's expected timetable for passage of that bill?
I'll seek advice from Minister Turnbull on that. As Manager of Government Business, my role is to seek to give effect to the agenda of my ministerial colleagues, so I'll seek that advice from him.
I'm specifically, my expectation, without ever having asked this before, is that it would need to be through before the next budget. Otherwise, well, maybe not need to be through, but Mr Abid, is it correct that that funding to SBS was cut, and that this is one way that the government is seeking to make up the shortfall?
Yes, so there was two elements to the efficiency review that was put forward late last year. One was a straight budget cut, an efficiency savings cut, and the other section was this cut that would result from a change in legislation. And the two have been treated separately. We're obviously getting on with the first round of cuts in the organisation. They're going to plan, and the second part of the legislative changes needs to go ahead for us to be able to implement any changes there. Obviously, if that doesn't go ahead, we are left with a very considerable funding hole in the organisation. And I would hope that we could then have another conversation with the government at that time, should the legislation not pass. But if it does pass, we'll then be able to move ahead with plans to start talking to our advertisers and looking at our ad breaks.
Yeah. And your estimation, and thanks for, again, this is listed as commercial in confidence, but I'm presuming that's been lifted in having it tabled to an estimates committee, is that?
Yes,
yeah,
that's correct.
All right, we can scratch that.
It's a bit late, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit late now, you just tabled it.
To make you feel important.
So by the station's estimates, the shortfall would be between $5 and $7 million, or are you estimating that over the forward estimates, that additional 20 to 30 million would...
The number that's been taken out of the forward estimates is $28.5 million. 28 point-ish. So it starts off in year one as $4 million and builds up to about $9 million in the last year.
And in that, would you expect that beyond the horizon of the forward estimates that it stays at that high level, at $9 million a year? Is that what we should be?
Yes, that's and indeed the last 2 years of the 4 years is the same figure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So a quick
plateaus.
A quick ramp, and then it plateaus at around $9 million a year. You are therefore disputing the free TV estimates that are, as you indicated, 10-fold higher. Well, 5-fold higher, I guess. What would that $9 million a year in shifted advertising, that's your estimate, does that amount to a net increase, decrease, or equivalent funding to what you'd be losing from consolidated revenue?
Well, the way it's been designed and modelled is that it would be a net zero to SBS, so we would need to earn that $28 million in replacement of government funding, which has been reduced to the same amount.
All right. And if you happen to be better at selling ads than you were hoping, then that's an incentive, I guess, to do better.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would imagine that would be the case. I
All right.
certainly would hope so.
And just to remind me, I don't have this right in front of me. Let's just use the $9 million figure if that's what you're expecting it to plateau at. What is that as a proportion of overall annual station expenditure for all of your station broadcasts?
It would be 9 over 380 million in terms of total funding, but that would include a $90 million transmission fund as well. So if you take the transmission out, James, just...
I think it's probably fair to take the transmission out. There's nothing you can do to provide efficiencies to that. That's money that goes straight out the door.
Yeah.
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 Okay, I'm just trying to get a sense of what overall proportion that $9 million represents to an organisation as lean as SBS.
Yeah, so it's about 4% in total.
Okay, thank you.
And that would obviously, given the material efficiency cuts that we had last year, that would mean that those funds would need to come out of our content area.
There's nothing else left to cut anywhere else?
I'm very confident that there's very little left, if anything, to cut in our non-content part of our business.
Is that going to hit Australian content, stuff that's commissioned here, or would you more likely go after stuff that you purchase from elsewhere?
I think it's early to say. We obviously have a bunch of plans looking at different scenarios which we're yet to decide on and put to the board. We're still working through that, so it's probably a little bit early to talk about what we would do. But I'm confident in saying that we have exhausted all saving measures in our non-content areas, and therefore the budget savings would need to come out of our content areas.
Yeah, that was described as a down payment, or that original efficiency kind of cut that happened last year. So that's taken all of that out.
Yeah.
If the change does go ahead, if Parliament passes the bill, what changes would be involved? Will you need to hire more sales staff or sales and marketing staff?
Yes, we would probably increase our sales staff just a little bit proportionally to be able to go out and obviously sell the additional airtime. That's all built into our cost of sales in the modelling.
How many sales and marketing staff do you have? And are they all based in Sydney and Melbourne?
No, the sales staff are actually mostly in Sydney and Melbourne, but we also have some small representative staff in Adelaide, Perth and Brisbane as well.
Okay.
Because obviously we need to be able to sell both in terms of metro and regional areas, and so we need staff to be able to work in with local media agencies in all of the major states. Yeah.
Okay. And we might have covered this in previous sessions, in fact I'm almost certain we have, but how much of your ad revenue, again just for the TV stations at this time, how much of your ad revenue is achieved in prime time as a percentage of total ad revenue?
That's a figure that we don't report on, obviously, for reasons of confidentiality. It's a competitive thing, but I think I'm comfortable in it would be in the range of about 60 to 70%.
It's that high, okay. So that's how you think you could squeeze another $9 million, or not you necessarily, but the government thinks that it could squeeze another $9 million out of opening that window up in prime time.
It's certainly, it's not an easy thing to do. It's certainly going to be difficult for us, but, we believe on our modelling it could be achieved, but it would take time to ramp up to do that.
Mm. If the bill doesn't pass, is that $9 million, or the cuts are already in effect? Is that the case? Or is the government... Do you believe that if the bill doesn't pass, that funding would at least be held as it is at the moment?
My understanding is that the figures have already been removed from our forward estimates. I think that's already come out, hasn't it, James? Yes. Yes, it has. Yeah, it's already come out of our forward estimates.
Okay. We had discussions with the Minister about contingency planning or if the bill doesn't pass the Parliament?
Only at a very high level in that, if it doesn't pass, then we'll obviously need to have another conversation about what the organisation and the government will do.
What degree of planning has occurred within the broadcaster?
Well, considering the funding disappears from the 1st of July for us, we obviously need to start thinking about what would we do in terms of being able to reduce our costs should the government not be in a position to replace that funding for us. So we're working through our plans at the moment in terms of contingency planning and what would need to go.
Are we talking job losses, and if so, how many?
Again, it's a little bit early to say, and I certainly don't want to get into for want of a better term, a Pepper the Pig scenario today. It's a little bit early for us to talk about what our options would be, but we're, needless to say, we are going through them at the moment, and we're working on the theory, of course, that it does get passed in the Senate, but if it doesn't, we need to have Plan B, and we're working on that.
You are working on a Plan B. This is my final question. There are only 12 sitting days left for the Senate before the next budget. There's a huge amount of legislation backlogged from the last budget, as you'd no doubt be aware.
Yeah.
How advanced is your Plan B planning? I think you'd better start taking very seriously the prospect that you've had funding pulled off the table.
Yeah.
Without that mechanism, which I must say at the outset I'm extremely sceptical about, without that mechanism being legislated for.
It is very concerning, and we're working well with the Minister, and the Minister's certainly aware of the pressures that we have in terms of our time constraints. But I guess it's a question for the government in terms of when they plan to put that before the Senate.
Yeah, understood. That's out of your hands. What's that?
It's in your hands, Senator Logan.
No, it's in the Minister's hands. It's not my bill.
No, but in terms
of the vote.
I don't like having a gun put to my head, quite frankly. And I know it's not your proposition, Chair, but this is extraordinary blackmail. It's pass my bill or the broadcaster gets it. And I don't think many of us are going to respond that well to that nature of threat. Just could you maybe, for our comfort, indicate...
It's a proposition that will be before the Senate.
It's the purest...
that you will have the opportunity to vote on legislation.
And if we don't vote for it, if we don't vote for it, you're going to cut 4 to 5% out of funding of a very lean broadcaster.
Well, we're working on securing the passage of the legislation.
How's that working out, Senator Fifield?
Minister Turnbull is a persuasive individual, so I'm sure he'll be talking to Senate colleagues.
I hear he's talking to a lot of his colleagues at the moment.
We'll leave it there before anybody responds to Senator Dastyari's inflammatory comments. Thank you, Chair.